about believing what Meghan Markle and Prince Harry said. I don't need to, because that...
You think the British media were against you. I actually think that the media was incredibly supportive of them right to the
crisis. No, the world's biggest victims right now are the Duke and Duchess of Netflix. And don't take my word.
You know what's crazy? How a story can quietly unravel without anyone even trying to tear it down. It doesn't always happen with accusations or shouting. Sometimes it just stops making sense. The details don't line up anymore. The timelines wobble. The pictures don't match the narrative. And suddenly people aren't being haters. They're just confused. That's exactly where all of this began. Meghan Markle's pregnancy with Archie, something that should have been simple, joyful, and clear. And yet, almost immediately, people started noticing things. Tiny things at first. A bump that looked different just days apart. Dates that seemed to shift depending on who was telling the story. A carefully talked about home birth plan that quietly turned into a hospital delivery with absolutely no explanation. Then, out of nowhere, scheduling notes surfaced. Timelines, internal memos, documents that suggested what was happening behind the scenes wasn't matching what the public was being told. And that's when Piers Morgan completely lost it. He's on air, waving papers, practically shaking with disbelief, saying this entire thing looked less like a pregnancy and more like a staged production. And here's the part that stopped people cold. No angry denials, no emotional rebuttals, no carefully crafted clapback, just silence. Deep, uncomfortable silence. So let's talk about what people actually noticed, what raised eyebrows, and why that silence ended up speaking louder than any statement ever could. Once you start connecting the dots, it gets unsettling.
Nothing I thought about Meghan Markle was driven by anything to do with her race or skin color. Why would it be?
This didn't begin with drama. It started softly, glossy, almost dreamy. The images felt straight out of a magazine spread. Perfect lighting, perfect angles, outfits chosen with precision so the bump caught the light just right. Everything felt intentional, carefully curated, nothing random, and people loved it at first. Of course they did. A royal pregnancy is always going to draw attention. People want updates, they want to feel part of the moment. But the longer it went on, the more it felt less like natural sharing and more like controlled storytelling. Meghan had spoken openly about wanting a home birth. People around her echoed it.
She came out with in that interview. So be it. I'm always in talks with people. I think I've been talks with you guys.
It fit the image she was building. Private, peaceful, natural. Frogmore Cottage felt like the perfect setting. No chaos, no cameras. Everyone assumed that's how it would happen. Then May 6, 2019 arrived, and suddenly none of that mattered. She wasn't at Frogmore. She was at the Portland Hospital in London. A private hospital, yes. One with royal history, yes, but still a hospital. And listen, no one is saying hospital births are strange. She was 37, first pregnancy. Complications happen. Plans change. Doctors intervene. That's life. That's responsibility. The issue wasn't the hospital, it was the silence. No explanation, no statement, no doctors advised, nothing. Just a complete pivot with no context. And when you spend months shaping a narrative about privacy and home births, then abruptly change direction without a word, people are going to ask why. That's human nature. That curiosity sent people back through the photos.
Nina may not agree with it. I think most people who watched the interview probably ended up agreeing with me. It doesn't really matter whether you agree or not.
The timelines, the public appearances. And suddenly those sweet images didn't look so innocent anymore. They started feeling staged, rehearsed, like stills from a carefully managed production. That unexplained switch was the spark. Once people noticed that, everything else came under scrutiny. Photos were compared side by side, dates lined up or didn't. The bump appeared high in one photo, low in another taken days later. Prominent one week, barely visible the next. Sure, clothing matters, angles matter. But when it keeps happening over and over, people stop dismissing it as coincidence. And here's where the control narrative really started to stand out. Every image release felt timed. Every appearance felt choreographed. Every detail dropped exactly when it would have the most impact. And yes, celebrities manage optics all the time. But you can't demand privacy while simultaneously directing every frame of the story. That contradiction is what made people uneasy. Once one thing doesn't add up, you start wondering what else doesn't either. That's when things exploded. Allegedly, someone close to the situation decided they were done staying quiet. Scheduling notes surfaced, internal documentation, and what they showed was nothing like the public story. Dates didn't match. Appointments were logged on days when Meghan was photographed somewhere else entirely. Not nearby, not close, across the city. All-day contradictions, the kind you can't explain away with times were off. And then there was the birth arrival narrative, the serene, discreet hospital entrance. Except according to those notes, she wasn't even there at the time she was supposed to be arriving. That's the kind of detail that makes people stop scrolling and stare. Piers Morgan seized on it, and you could tell he was having the time of his life. He thrives on inconsistencies. He went through timelines point by point, calling out overlaps, gaps, contradictions. If dates don't line up, what else doesn't? Pregnancy timelines aren't flexible. Trimesters show. Appointments happen on specific days. Births have timestamps. Either you were there or you weren't. And when basic facts keep shifting, it messes with people's heads. Then came the bump conversation. And yes, it sounds uncomfortable. But once it was out there, it couldn't be unseen. Photos days apart looked dramatically different. Not subtle, dramatic. Online comparisons multiplied. Morgan called it marketing, not maternity. He suggested every appearance was being staged like a production. Not just styled, but directed. Then he dropped the bomb. Multiple versions of the birth announcement, written in advance. Different narratives ready depending on how things played out. Who does that? Who pre-writes multiple birth stories? That's not how normal people announce babies. That's rollout planning, strategy, optics. He showed clips of Meghan cradling the bump theatrically. Slow movements, protective hands, dreamy expressions, then cut to footage from days later, jogging upstairs. No hesitation, no protection, moving freely. And yes, pregnancies differ. Some women stay active. That's not the issue. The issue was inconsistency within the same timeline. Big dramatic pregnancy moments when cameras were on. Completely different behavior when they weren't. That pattern bothered people. A lot. Then came the palace staff claims. Meghan had described feeling unsupported, isolated, mistreated, and people believed her. But those internal memos painted a different picture. Staff bending over backwards, accommodating every request, working double shifts for wardrobe changes. Unsigned meetings declined, later described publicly as exclusions. Records showing invitations extended and refused. Piers read it all on air, line by line, disbelief dripping from his voice. And again, specificity mattered. These weren't feelings, these were documents, timestamps, instructions. Either they existed or they didn't. Either staff were overworked or they weren't. The public started wavering. Sympathy cracked, doubt crept in. Then came the silence. No response, no statement, no clarification. Meghan, who had always spoken out before, said nothing. Harry, whose brand was protecting my family, said nothing. Celebrity friends who once rushed to her defense vanished. Even the palace stayed quiet. And silence in this case was deafening. Piers kept hammering it. Where's the rebuttal? Where's the correction? Why break pattern now? When someone who always responds suddenly doesn't, people assume there's no good answer. He showed interview clips, Meghan describing intense morning sickness, barely functioning, then cut to footage from those same days, smiling, engaged, energetic. Again, sickness fluctuates, but the contrast was extreme, and it repeated. He called it theatrical, performance, not lived experience. And when he laid out multiple interviews side by side, the same pauses, the same delivery, the same emotional beats appeared again and again, rehearsed vulnerability, scripted authenticity. That's when his argument sharpened. Motherhood, he claimed, had become a shield, a way to shut down criticism. Question anything and you're attacking a pregnant woman, a new mother. And culturally, we recoil from that. We're trained to protect. He argued that instinct was being used strategically. Then he turned to Harry. Contradictory instructions, shifting messaging, and the line that made people gasp. Either Meghan wasn't fully honest with Harry, or they were both in on crafting the narrative together. A partnership in storytelling. The palace stayed quiet. Meghan stayed quiet. Harry stayed quiet. And once doubt takes root, it spreads. Credibility cracks. Every future claim gets examined harder. The benefit of the doubt disappears. This wasn't about attacking someone, it was about consistency. Dates, locations, records, either they match or they don't. And when no one addresses those questions directly, silence becomes its own answer. That's what lingered. Not anger, not outrage. Just that unsettling feeling that something doesn't quite add up, and once you see the cracks, you can't stop seeing them. And here's the thing that keeps gnawing at people long after the clips stop rolling and the studio lights go off. This wasn't just one odd moment. It wasn't one awkward photo or one poorly explained decision. It was the accumulation of everything. The way each explanation seemed to shift slightly depending on the setting. The way timelines bent just enough to fit the moment. The way emotion was always perfectly placed, perfectly timed, never spilling over, never messy, never uncontrolled. Real life is messy. Pregnancy is messy. Motherhood is chaotic. And yet what people were shown felt polished to the point of sterility, like nothing was allowed to happen unless it served a purpose. What really unsettled a lot of viewers was how often questions were reframed as cruelty. Anyone asking for clarity was accused of malice. Anyone pointing out inconsistencies was labeled hateful. And that tactic worked for a long time. People backed off because nobody wants to be the person attacking a pregnant woman or a new mother. But eventually, curiosity outweighed fear. Because curiosity isn't cruel, it's human. And once people felt manipulated rather than informed, the mood shifted. There's also something deeply uncomfortable about the idea that empathy itself might have been engineered, that emotional moments were not spontaneous but structured, that vulnerability came with rehearsal, that tears were timed. When Piers said she wasn't asking for empathy, she was manufacturing it. That line stuck because it put words to a feeling people already had but couldn't quite articulate. It explained why something felt off even when everything looked right. And once that suspicion sets in, it doesn't stay contained. It spreads. Suddenly people start re-examining other moments, other interviews, other claims, the Oprah interview, the Netflix series, the podcast confessions. All of it gets replayed with a different lens. Not a hostile one, but a skeptical real one. And skepticism is dangerous to anyone whose power depends on being believed without question. That's why silence hurt more than any denial ever could, because silence doesn't correct anything. It doesn't clarify. It doesn't reassure. It just leaves space, and the public filled that space themselves, with side-by-side videos, with timelines, with screenshots, with questions that grew louder the longer they went unanswered. Supporters started hedging. Neutral observers leaned away. Critics felt vindicated. And through it all, no one stepped forward to say, here's what really happened. The tragic part in all of this is that if there had been transparency early on, much of this might have faded. A simple explanation: acknowledging changes, owning contradictions. Real people forgive honesty. What they don't forgive is feeling played, feeling like their compassion was used as a tool rather than met with sincerity. And that's where this ultimately lands. Not in outrage, but in doubt. Not in hatred, but in distrust. Once trust cracks, everything becomes harder. Every future story feels suspect. Every emotional appeal feels calculated. Every silence feels intentional. And rebuilding credibility after that is almost impossible, especially when people believe they were emotionally guided instead of simply told the truth. So whether you think this whole thing is overblown or you believe the questions are justified, one reality remains. People aren't watching passively anymore. They're paying attention, they're comparing, they're remembering. And narratives that once flowed freely now hit resistance, because once the audience feels manipulated, they don't just stop believing one story, they start questioning all of them. So what do you think? Is Piers onto something, or is this all being blown out of proportion? Drop your thoughts. People are watching more closely now, and once you start looking, it's hard to stop.